Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning into this story. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And before we start, a big thank you to those supporting the channel with an extra membership, especially the Scouts. I see you, I appreciate you, and I create this for you. Now, let's get started. When you've spent half your life either behind bars or finding ways to avoid them, certain rules become second nature. You don't trust coincidences, you don't leave loose ends, and you definitely don't underestimate how quickly everything can unravel. My name is Ramon Correia, and I've been alive 41 years. Most of them spent doing things that other people tend to regret later. This last job was supposed to be my farewell to the game. One final run that would buy my way to someplace quiet, someplace far from the noise, the heat, and the streets of Brazil that seemed eager to swallow me whole. Belo Horizonte wasn't exactly paradise, but it was just the right kind of city for our work. Big enough for a payoff worth the risk, small enough that the local police wouldn't know what hit them until we were gone. Everything was set up smoothly, quietly, and with a certain finesse that Vivian insisted on. She had that way about her, polished but dangerous. Vivian was 30, a striking woman who once wore the crown of Miss Brasilia before a scandal stripped it away. She never liked talking about it, and I never pressed. What mattered to me was that she could handle a weapon as easily as a smile, and both served her equally well. Our inside man at the Banco São Miguel was João, one of the security guards. João was reliable enough, but he had his price. We gave him 25% upfront, and he gave us the entire blueprint. Delivery times, guard rotations, access codes, even the lunch schedule of the evening shift. That's how carefully Vivian planned things. Every step mapped out, every second accounted for. We chose masks, nothing subtle, bright clown faces painted with absurd smiles. Vivian's idea of irony. I wasn't one for theatrics, but she argued that shock worked better than fear. They'll freeze, she said. They'll remember the clowns, not us. She was right more often than I liked to admit. I picked up a laundry van, plain white, from the Branco Limpo commercial cleaning service, stolen the previous night from their depot in Barreiro Industrial. Nobody ever looks twice at workers in uniform pushing carts of linen through a bank lobby. We drove through Belo Horizonte as dusk began staining the sky red, down Avenida Amazonas, past families going home from work, shopkeepers locking up, taxis honking in evening traffic. The world outside the van was normal, oblivious. Inside, the shotguns were loaded, hidden under folded sheets. We reached the bank exactly at 6:47 p.m., 13 minutes before closing. I parked in the loading zone, carefully leaving space as if expecting other trucks to arrive. João waited at the side entrance, uniform pressed neatly, the plastic smile he wore each day unchanged. He nodded once, a simple acknowledgement of our arrival. Vivian adjusted her mask, a momentary pause, then pulled it down. The vibrant clown mask erased her beauty, leaving only something unsettling, dangerous beneath the surface. I followed her lead, slipping my own mask on, feeling the thin plastic press against my skin, the cheap elastic stretching tight. I gripped the shotgun, then stepped onto the sidewalk, scanning left and right once. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever notices until the masks come down. João unlocked the service entrance quietly, smoothly, as if welcoming guests to a private party. Inside, the hall was brightly lit, polished floors reflecting the fluorescent ceiling panels. We moved swiftly, methodically. Vivian took point, walking briskly toward the teller counter. She said nothing, the shotgun in her hand speaking clearly enough. The few remaining customers stared in confusion, frozen in the sudden impossibility unfolding before them. On the ground, Vivian instructed quietly, not shouting, not hysterical. Her calmness was terrifying in itself. They obeyed immediately, dropping to the polished tile, faces down, breathing heavily but silent, as though making noise might make them targets. Vivian gestured to the tellers, who silently stepped back from their stations, hands raised cautiously, slowly. Nobody resisted. João, following our instructions, quietly handed me the vault keys, his expression carefully blank. Vivian nodded once to me, her way of telling me to move quickly. I left her covering the main floor and proceeded to the vault entrance at the rear of the branch. João had deactivated the silent alarms and security cameras from his terminal 10 minutes earlier, exactly as planned. The steel vault door opened smoothly, the tumblers spinning freely, revealing neatly stacked bundles of cash inside. Crisp reais, 3.8 million of them. My hands moved quickly, filling 2 duffel bags until the canvas strained. By the time I hoisted them, my arms burned, and the bag straps dug deep into my shoulders. Back out front, Vivian hadn't moved an inch, her shotgun steady, eyes calm behind the painted smile of her mask. She motioned to me subtly, signaling that everything was still under control. João pretended fear, carefully playing his role. Everything was precise. Perfect even. We left the building exactly 11 minutes after entering. No police sirens, no gunshots. Nothing but the quiet hum of traffic on Avenida Amazonas and the click of the van doors closing behind us. Vivian pulled off her mask, her face unreadable in the fading light. Our hideout was in an industrial area near Contagem, a quiet commercial laundry on Avenida Perimetral. Branco Limpo, the same company we'd borrowed the van from. Their large warehouse doubled as a safe house, thanks to Lucio, an old acquaintance who now ran the place. Lucio had spent time with me inside a cell block in Aracatuba years ago, and we'd kept in touch for times exactly like this. Loyalty had limits, but debts had weight. Lucio owed me, and he paid his debt by giving us a room hidden in the sub-basement beneath rows of industrial washers and dryers. A solid door, reinforced concrete, separate ventilation, quiet and private, out of sight, invisible. We arrived as the city lights began flickering to life, a gentle haze settling over the skyline. Lucio waited for us by the loading dock, the overhead lamps buzzing softly. He asked no questions, just helped carry the duffel bags down below. Vivian stood aside, smoking silently, watching everything, always watching. We planned to wait 10 days. 10 days until the heat died down, until the police exhausted every lead and shifted focus. Then we'd move quietly to a small private airstrip near Montes Claros. Lucio had arranged transport documents, forged permits, and enough fuel to carry us out of Brazil. From there, maybe the Azores, Cabo Verde, someplace without extradition agreements or long memories. A clean escape finally, but plans never account for the impossible. That first night was quiet, but strange noises drifted in from outside the warehouse walls, faint echoes in the distance. Police sirens, maybe. I slept little, restless, uncomfortable with the quiet weight of stolen money beneath our feet. The next day passed slowly. Lucio said his workers hadn't shown up for their shifts. Unusual, but not alarming. We spent hours quietly pacing the concrete floor, waiting, checking the television occasionally. The news was scattered, fragmented, reports of violence in Sao Paulo, attacks in Rio, something about mass hysteria spreading northward. Authorities were confused, vague, uncertain. By evening, 2 channels had gone dark. Vivian was tense, pacing more, smoking quietly, her eyes unreadable. I kept checking the bags of money, counting bundles idly, the paper crackling dryly between my fingers. Something about the money felt unreal now, distant, as if its value was fading. Outside, sirens became more frequent, louder, not the familiar rhythm of normal city emergencies, but bursts of frantic noise that ended abruptly, replaced by strange silences that stretched too long. By the 3rd morning, things were undeniably worse. Lucio came down to us pale, unsettled. Someone had tried to break into the warehouse overnight. The lock had held, but a bloody handprint remained on the metal doorframe, dried to a dull red smear. Vivian insisted we barricade the basement entry. I agreed immediately. We heard faint screams outside that afternoon, distant but undeniable. The remaining news stations described something unbelievable. People attacking each other openly, riots breaking out, police overwhelmed. They used cautious terms, civil unrest, unknown violence, but the images said enough. There was panic in their voices, uncertainty behind their careful words. By nightfall, everything felt different. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was the emptiness that silence leaves behind. Lucio remained upstairs, nervous and pacing, checking doors repeatedly. Vivian sat quietly, gripping her shotgun, eyes locked on the reinforced door separating us from the world above. This wasn't the escape I'd planned. Something had shifted in Belo Horizonte, something that went beyond the police, beyond the robbery. Something had broken, something fundamental and permanent, and the world was changing faster than we could adapt. We were trapped, hidden beneath the city, surrounded by stolen money that suddenly meant nothing. It wasn't freedom anymore, it was a burden. The walls that protected us now felt closer, thicker. Vivian glanced at me, silent, knowing. Something was coming. We both felt it. We just didn't yet know exactly what it was. I remember clearly how the hours stretched on endlessly beneath the humming fluorescent lights of our underground shelter. The steady mechanical sounds from the washers and dryers upstairs, once comforting background noise, became strangely oppressive, like a ticking clock counting down to something inevitable. Vivian sat cross-legged on a folding cot, her shotgun laid neatly across her lap. She kept her eyes fixed on the reinforced steel door, as if expecting it to burst open any second. Her silence wasn't born of calm, but of tension. I knew her enough to recognize the sharp edge beneath her stillness. She wasn't a woman who waited patiently, yet waiting was all we had. On the third night, the television lost all signals completely. The last news we'd caught had been a desperate loop of government-issued warnings. Stay indoors, avoid contact, authorities are responding. They never said responding to what, but their hollow reassurance did nothing to settle the uncertainty creeping into every corner of our minds. After the screen finally went dark, we had only guesses and fragmented rumors to guide us. Lucio, who had never been built for this kind of pressure, was unraveling rapidly. He'd started pacing incessantly between the supply shelves and the door, muttering vague promises to himself about rescue teams that would surely come. I didn't correct him. False hope was sometimes better than no hope at all. Still, his anxiety was contagious. Even Vivian found herself glancing toward him occasionally, a look of irritation flashing briefly in her eyes. It was early the next morning, while the city above us was likely bathed in a sunrise we couldn't see, that the first direct threat arrived. We heard heavy pounding from upstairs, rhythmic, persistent blows against the warehouse's main entry doors. At first, it sounded like the deliberate knock of someone desperate but rational, someone human. Lucio stood abruptly, hopeful, convinced help had finally arrived. I stopped him with a single look. Something in the pattern of the knocks was off. Too repetitive, lacking urgency, just continuous and relentless pounding. Vivian slowly stood, gripping her shotgun tighter as she carefully moved toward the stairs, signaling silently for us to stay put. When she returned moments later, her face was drawn and pale. "We have to secure this door properly," she said flatly, setting her weapon down and moving instantly toward the shelves where we'd stacked old cleaning equipment. Together we barricaded the basement entrance with heavy metal shelving, industrial-sized boxes of laundry detergent, and plastic drums filled with water. The pounding continued overhead, a dull, ceaseless hammering that had become strangely mechanical. It wasn't until hours later that it finally stopped, replaced once more by the unsettling silence that we were learning to fear more than noise itself. Time lost meaning as we drifted into a restless routine. We took shifts, one person awake, two resting, never letting our guard fully down. Sleep came in brief intervals, punctuated by nightmares vivid enough to make waking moments preferable. Vivian hardly spoke anymore. She'd always been taciturn, but now she'd withdrawn deeper, her anger replaced by something colder, something harder to read. I didn't push her for conversation. We both knew there was little to say that wouldn't make things worse. It was around midday, judging only by our watches, when we heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass echoing through the warehouse above. It was sharp, abrupt, followed by slow, dragging noises that crept across the floorboards overhead. We froze instantly, eyes meeting in silent communication. Lucio stared upward, breathing unevenly, his courage hanging by a thread. Whatever was upstairs had gotten inside, and the dragging sound grew closer, slowly inching toward the basement stairs. We waited in perfect stillness, weapons aimed, ready to fire at the first sign of movement. Minutes felt like hours as the sound paused at the top of the stairs, lingering, as if sensing our presence. It seemed to hesitate, uncertain, then moved away slowly, retreating further into the warehouse. But it did not leave. We could hear it continue its aimless wandering, bumping clumsily against walls and furniture, lost in its own dark confusion. We stayed quiet, unmoving, alert to every slight creak or shift. It was only as evening fell that Vivian finally whispered what we all were thinking. We couldn't stay trapped down here forever. The reality of our situation was becoming impossible to ignore. The water and supplies were limited, the generator unreliable, and with the warehouse compromised, our shelter had become a prison. We needed a plan, an escape route, and we needed it soon. Lucio muttered fearfully about tunnels beneath the building, abandoned maintenance passages from before his company had taken ownership. I demanded details, not reassurances. Under pressure, he admitted they led into an old drainage system connecting to a pumping station near the outskirts of the city. It was dangerous, dark, narrow, possibly flooded, but it might offer a chance. We agreed quickly. It wasn't ideal, but nothing about this situation was ideal. We packed essentials into small bags: water, ammunition, a flashlight, medical supplies. The stolen cash was heavier now, somehow tainted, but Vivian insisted we keep at least some of it. "We earned it," she said quietly, her voice holding a strange bitterness, "even if it's worthless now." The entrance to the maintenance tunnels was hidden behind a rusted access panel in the basement wall. Opening it unleashed a stale draft, the air heavy with moisture and decay. Inside was blackness, a void untouched by daylight. I went first, ducking under low ceilings, my flashlight casting thin beams across damp, cracked walls. The tunnel narrowed quickly, forcing us into single file, footsteps echoing wetly off concrete. Lucio whimpered behind me, his breathing loud and uneven in the oppressive silence. Vivian moved at the rear, shotgun ready, eyes fixed firmly behind us as we advanced slowly into the darkness. Minutes stretched unbearably, each step taking us deeper beneath Belo Horizonte. At times, the tunnel ceiling dripped steadily, coating us in gritty moisture. Occasionally, my flashlight beam caught pale shapes darting away, rats or something else just as desperate to survive. After what felt like an eternity, we reached an intersection. One path angled downward sharply, flooded ankle-deep with stagnant water. The other was dry, level, but tightly enclosed, its destination unknown. Lucio whispered uncertainly, choosing randomly, but Vivian calmly assessed both directions and decided the flooded tunnel was less likely blocked. We moved cautiously forward, our shoes splashing softly, senses heightened, nerves straining beneath layers of forced calm. We traveled like ghosts, cautious not to disturb whatever silence existed down here, until my light caught something ahead, an obstruction, vaguely human in shape. My pulse quickened instinctively, but I forced myself calm, stepping forward carefully, illuminating the obstruction clearly. It was indeed human, or had been, a worker from long ago, judging by the remains of a reflective vest. His body had decayed to bones wrapped in tattered cloth, but the position, slumped and half submerged, suggested an accident rather than violence. Vivian glanced briefly, unfazed, pushing past without comment. Lucio trembled, eyes wide, staring fixedly away as he passed. The water grew deeper, nearly knee-high, forcing us to slow further. My flashlight beam shivered with each movement, casting unsettling shadows on damp concrete walls, streaked with algae and rust. Ahead, I finally saw it. A metal ladder bolted onto a wall, leading upward to another access hatch. My relief was tempered by caution. Vivian silently took position below me as I climbed, testing each rung carefully. The hatch resisted at first, rusted shut by years of neglect, but eventually yielded with a sharp metallic groan. Air thick with chlorine rot and river silt spilled over us as I pushed the hatch. We crawled onto cracked pavement behind a decommissioned water treatment plant, rusted clarifier tanks and weed-choked pipes silhouetted against an orange glow of distant fires. The city skyline lay distant, darkened except for isolated clusters of smoke rising lazily from scattered fires. The quiet was unnatural, broken only occasionally by faint gunfire and indistinct cries somewhere far away. We'd escaped our basement prison, but the freedom above ground felt hollow, uncertain. Lucio stared back toward the city, his expression lost. Vivian checked her shotgun again, face unreadable, eyes already searching our surroundings for threats or opportunities. As I stood between them, breathing the strange evening air, the reality was clear. Everything had changed, and we were caught in the beginning of something we barely understood. We had the stolen money, our weapons, and a thin chance at survival. But none of that felt as reassuring as it once had. All our careful plans, all our preparation, now seemed meaningless compared to the unpredictable horror emerging from the darkness around us. The sky above Belo Horizonte was losing its daylight quickly, blending from orange into a murky twilight. We moved carefully through empty side streets, avoiding the broader avenues. The city around us had fallen into an eerie silence, punctuated occasionally by distant scattered gunshots or the crackle of fires burning unchecked. Vivian walked steadily beside me, shotgun cradled close, her gaze constantly scanning our surroundings. Lucio, trailing slightly behind, limped noticeably, his breathing labored. The man wasn't built for endurance, physically or mentally, and the tunnel escape had drained whatever little strength remained in him. Still, he kept pace without complaint, eyes fixed on the pavement, locked into a quiet, desperate kind of resignation. We spotted the supermarket from a block away, its windows smashed, automatic doors hanging open at odd angles. The place looked looted already, but it was our best option. The building was a concrete rectangle, sturdy enough to serve as temporary shelter. Carefully, we approached from the side, circling around broken shopping carts and abandoned vehicles. I checked each entrance slowly, listening for movement inside. Nothing stirred, nothing moved, just silence and the unsettling emptiness of a place stripped bare. We slipped inside quietly, stepping over spilled products and empty packaging scattered across the floor. It was clear the store had seen frantic, panicked crowds. The shelves were picked clean, debris and overturned carts strewn everywhere. The place smelled faintly of spoiled produce and spilled cleaning supplies. But the main area was still defensible, enclosed by solid walls with exits we could barricade. It would do for now. Vivian immediately began clearing fallen shelves away from the entrance, pushing them into position as barricades. I took Lucio aside and handed him the metal cash box, instructing him to hold it tightly. Then, I quietly gathered the rest of the money from our bags and took it toward a rear emergency exit. Outside, behind the supermarket, was an enclosed loading area, fenced off and hidden from street view. A corner paver had cracked years earlier, leaving enough gap for my crowbar. I levered the broken slab up, sweat stinging my eyes as I inched it aside, then scooped a shallow pit in the damp clay below. The bundles of cash, once symbols of freedom, power and escape, felt strangely meaningless now, their value dissolved by the unraveling world around us. I buried them deep, covering the hole methodically, ensuring no trace remained. It felt oddly like a funeral, the burial of something I'd once thought essential. Returning inside, I locked the exit securely and rejoined Vivian and Lucio. We decided to make a quick sweep for any remaining supplies, food, water, anything useful the looters might have missed. We moved carefully, stepping over broken glass, our flashlights casting jittery circles of illumination across barren shelves. In a storeroom at the far end of the supermarket, we found a stack of bottled water still wrapped in plastic, overlooked by the earlier panic. Vivian quickly started loading bottles into a backpack, her expression carefully blank. Beside the water were discarded wrappers, cardboard boxes, and scattered papers. I moved toward the corner, hoping to find something else hidden, perhaps canned goods or medicine. That's when we heard the dragging sound, sharp and sudden, a scraping shuffle from behind the store's rear storage racks. Vivian froze instantly, eyes alert, weapon ready. I raised my flashlight cautiously, the narrow beam cutting through shadows. At first, I saw nothing, just empty pallets and overturned crates. Then movement, unmistakable and slow, emerged from the gloom. Two figures shuffled awkwardly, stumbling forward. Their clothes were torn, stained dark with dried blood, eyes cloudy and unfocused. They weren't looters, at least not anymore. They were infected, aimlessly wandering the abandoned store, trapped in an endless loop of confusion and hunger. Immediately, Vivian reacted, stepping forward calmly, weapon raised. A single precise shot sent the first one falling backward, hitting the concrete floor without a sound. But as she chambered the next round, another noise drew my attention. More shuffling footsteps from our left. 3 more infected stumbled out of the shadows, blocking our retreat. I shouted sharply to Lucio, pulling him roughly behind me as Vivian turned swiftly, weapon blazing once more. The narrow storeroom erupted into sudden chaos. Shots echoed sharply, flashes of light illuminating twisted faces as the infected lunged clumsily forward. In the confusion, I saw too late one of them, lower to the ground, crawling rather than walking. It lunged suddenly from the shadows, catching Lucio's leg just above the ankle, teeth sinking in deep and tearing through fabric. Lucio screamed, a terrible, ragged sound that broke sharply through the noise. Vivian swung her weapon around, firing instantly. The infected went limp, but it had done its damage already. The remaining figures fell quickly beneath precise, practiced shots, collapsing silently onto the storeroom floor, motionless again. The room fell back into quiet, a sudden jarring stillness following the violence. Lucio slumped onto the floor, eyes wide with shock and pain, gripping his injured leg tightly. Blood seeped steadily from beneath his fingers, pooling slowly onto the concrete floor. Vivian glanced at me silently, her expression darkening, understanding clearly what this meant. Infection had spread through the city faster than we'd believed possible. We'd seen enough in our brief time trapped underground to know there was no coming back from a bite like this. Lucio seemed to realize this too, his expression crumbling from pain into quiet despair. I stood silently over him, watching him struggle with the understanding of his own fate. It wasn't cruelty that drove my thoughts, nor anger, nor panic, just cold practicality. We'd been running since the moment the world started unraveling around us, and survival now depended entirely on quick, calculated decisions. Lucio was a risk we couldn't afford, a danger that would only grow more severe with every passing moment. Quietly, without ceremony or hesitation, I knelt beside him, laying one steady hand on his shoulder to keep him still. He barely resisted. His fingers clutched my sleeve once and he whispered, "Disculpa, I'm sorry." Then his eyes locked on mine. No anger, only the resigned dread of a man who knew the rules had changed forever. With a swift, precise motion, I ended it quickly, ensuring no further suffering, no lingering moment of false hope. Vivian watched without speaking, her gaze steady and accepting. She understood. This was the reality we now faced. Mercy was a luxury that belonged to another life. We spent the next few minutes scavenging through Lucio's belongings, gathering whatever useful items he still carried. Among the scattered personal effects, keys, wallet, useless identification papers, I found something folded neatly in his jacket pocket. A worn paper map, creased deeply from repeated folding and unfolding. Curious, I opened it carefully beneath the beam of my flashlight. My eyes traced over the faint pencil marks Lucio had added, a clear, deliberate route leading upriver, outside Belo Horizonte, toward a remote private airstrip tucked away in the rural outskirts. Vivian leaned closer, inspecting the markings carefully. Notes scribbled in Lucio's handwriting indicated fuel reserves and security provided by armed guards. This map wasn't just random directions. It was an escape plan Lucio had prepared, likely for himself, before everything spiraled out of control. For a moment, we shared a glance, recognizing this small, unexpected opportunity. The private airstrip could mean a flight out of Brazil entirely, a fresh start somewhere untouched by the chaos overtaking our city. It was thin hope, fragile, but it was something tangible at last. Together, we carefully secured the map and gathered our supplies, preparing to move again. The supermarket, which had seemed a safe haven just moments ago, now felt heavy with recent loss, another reminder of how swiftly our circumstances shifted. Outside, the darkness had fully taken hold, streets empty and silent beneath the weight of night. Vivian stepped forward calmly, shotgun ready once more, eyes sharp and alert. I followed quietly, holding tight the small metal cash box, the final remnants of a once vast fortune now buried, useless and forgotten behind us. We moved quietly into the uncertain night, following the faint pencil markings that led us toward the promise of escape, knowing every step forward was a gamble, every moment another test of endurance, will, and survival. The airstrip awaited, our best chance of leaving behind everything we'd lost, and everything we still stood to lose. The night had deepened fully now, smothering Belo Horizonte beneath an impenetrable blanket of darkness and silence. We kept moving carefully, using the shadows of the buildings as cover. Behind us lay the abandoned supermarket, Lucio's body, and the buried stacks of cash, useless relics of a time that no longer existed. Ahead lay uncertainty, thin hope traced in pencil on a worn map. The airstrip offered the chance of escape, but between us and that distant promise stretched miles of unfamiliar terrain, farmland, suburbs, and streets crawling with infected. We quickly discovered that the city had fallen even further into chaos than we'd imagined. Evidence of hurried evacuation attempts surrounded us. Abandoned cars scattered like broken toys, belongings strewn haphazardly in yards, doors swinging open as if homeowners had simply vanished mid-step. Sometimes we heard sounds in the darkness, muffled shuffling footsteps or the faint, aimless groans of the infected. Whenever that happened, we froze, waiting silently until the threat passed. It was exhausting, slow, but necessary. Vivian moved with quiet precision, her shotgun always ready, her eyes never betraying doubt or fear. We barely spoke, exchanging signals and glances, conserving energy and breath. As dawn slowly edged into view, painting the sky a dim grayish blue, we approached the city outskirts, the buildings gradually replaced by farmland, wide stretches of grass, and tilled earth. The once green fields had become overgrown, untended, weeds choking abandoned machinery, fences sagging from neglect. Here, away from the crowded city, the silence was thicker, heavy with the weight of emptiness. We moved steadily forward, sticking close to old wooden fences and lines of trees, avoiding open spaces as much as possible. Occasionally we passed scattered bodies, some clearly infected, others simply victims who'd fallen in those frantic first hours of panic. Each was a grim reminder of how swiftly everything had deteriorated. The map showed two primary bridges crossing the river, necessary to reach the northern suburb and the airstrip beyond. The first bridge we approached was a crumbling ruin, collapsed partially into the river below, a tangle of concrete and twisted metal blocking any hope of passage. The destruction appeared deliberate, as if authorities had tried and failed to slow the spread of the infection. Vivian pointed silently to the next bridge marked clearly on the map, a larger span further west, the main road northward, usually busy with traffic. Approaching, we quickly spotted the military checkpoint established there. Sandbagged barricades blocked both sides, heavy military trucks parked defensively, and soldiers with automatic weapons moved, watching every direction. We concealed ourselves behind a cluster of thick bushes, observing their movements. They seemed desperate and twitchy, opening fire randomly at distant shadows. It was too risky. The soldiers were no longer rational protectors. They were survivors, afraid and dangerous. A direct approach was impossible. As we backed away, two jumpy soldiers on the checkpoint's far side shouted about, the old freight spur still clear past Fazenda Santa Rita. That scrap of panic talk lit a spark. When we reached cover, Vivian traced the same spur on our map, a disused rail line curving north through empty farmland, far from roadblocks and patrols. The track had long fallen out of use, bypassing heavily populated areas, passing instead through empty farmland and isolated outskirts of the suburb. We decided it was our best chance to avoid detection, infected and military alike. We reached the railway tracks quickly, the steel rails rusted with neglect, wooden ties rotting beneath years of exposure to rain and sun. Vivian took point, stepping carefully along the railway ties, shotgun always raised slightly, prepared for anything. We moved quietly, wrapped in rain ponchos we'd found at the supermarket, the plastic crinkling softly with every careful step. The pace was slow, tedious, but necessary. To either side lay fields overgrown with tall wild grass, obscuring visibility and offering ample hiding spots for anything that might have wandered out here. Hours passed as we followed the track steadily north, the sun climbing higher, breaking briefly through the overcast sky, offering little warmth or comfort. Occasionally we saw small groups of infected shuffling aimlessly in distant fields. We crouched quietly, motionless, until they disappeared from sight, unwilling to risk confrontation unless absolutely necessary. Each encounter drained precious ammunition and energy, and our survival now depended on conserving both. Around midday, the railway curved closer to a small suburban village, nestled quietly near a line of trees, houses huddled closely together. It appeared abandoned, empty, silent. Yet something felt off, unsettling. Vivian slowed, raising her hand slightly in caution. We moved forward carefully, approaching the edge of the village quietly, alert for any sign of threat or opportunity. From a distance, the place appeared deserted, front doors swinging loosely on hinges, yards littered with debris. But as we drew nearer, subtle signs of recent human presence emerged. A freshly emptied water jug rested beside one house. Muddy footprints marked a front porch. As we moved toward the center of the village, a soft noise, a faint cough, drew our attention sharply. We both turned instantly, weapons raised, toward a small, single-story house with shutters drawn tightly closed. Approaching slowly, I tapped gently on the front door, announcing our presence quietly. After a long pause, the door creaked slightly open, revealing a man, gaunt and exhausted-looking, eyes wide with suspicion and fear. Behind him stood a woman, clutching a young child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, wrapped tightly in blankets. The child's face was pale, sweaty, clearly sick, but not infected, at least not obviously. The man watched us warily, his gaze flickering toward our weapons. I raised my hand slowly, signaling calmness, explaining carefully we were just passing through, looking for safe passage. His expression softened marginally, recognizing the desperation mirrored in our own eyes. Quietly, he explained they'd fled here days ago, hiding desperately from infected mobs overtaking their own neighborhood. The child had developed a high fever, growing weaker by the hour. He pleaded quietly, eyes desperate, begging for help, medicine, any kind of assistance. Vivian hesitated, something rare for her. She glanced quietly at the child, her expression unreadable, conflicted. Quietly, she asked me whether we could bring the child with us. Her voice held a rare softness, briefly breaking through the hard exterior she maintained constantly, but I shook my head, firmly, gently. "We're not saviors," I said quietly. "We're survivors." We had no medicine, no means of treating illness, no time for delays. Every additional burden decreased our chances of survival. Vivian's eyes hardened immediately, accepting reluctantly the cold truth of my words. The man's expression fell further into despair, accepting silently that no help was coming. I left him quietly with a few spare bottles of water, small compensation, but it was all we could offer. Without further words, we moved away from the small house, returning to the railway tracks, each step heavy with unspoken thoughts. Vivian walked silently beside me, eyes fixed forward, refusing to look back. Behind us lay another moment we'd had no choice but to leave behind. Another fragment of humanity lost to the relentless logic of survival. As we continued forward, leaving the quiet village fading into the distance, the afternoon deepened, grey clouds thickening overhead. Rain began falling softly, pattering gently against our ponchos, obscuring visibility slightly, but muffling sounds around us. Our path stretched ahead endlessly, the rails curving steadily northward, toward the promise of escape and safety, fragile, uncertain, but still possible. We moved onward, exhausted yet determined, knowing each decision we made now defined the fragile line between survival and death. The suburb lay just beyond the fields ahead, undoubtedly crawling with infected, but unavoidable on our path toward the airstrip. My grip tightened instinctively around the small metal cash box, its weight now more symbolic than practical, a reminder of everything we'd lost and everything we still stood to lose. Beside me, Vivian walked steadily onward, eyes narrowed against the rain, her face an unreadable mask of quiet determination. We no longer spoke of our plans or hopes, knowing the thin margins of our survival demanded complete focus on immediate threats. But silently, beneath our weary steps, beneath the cold logic guiding every decision, lingered unspoken doubts, faint hopes, and the painful awareness of how swiftly the world around us had unraveled. Rain continued to fall gently as we left the ghostly outline of the village behind us, each step carrying us closer to the northern suburbs. Our footsteps echoed softly along the old rail ties, the only sound besides the muted rustle of raindrops hitting plastic ponchos and sparse vegetation along the tracks. It felt as if we'd been walking forever, yet each glance toward the distant skyline reminded me how much further we still had to go. The small map in my pocket, carefully folded yet growing more fragile with each hour, showed the airstrip clearly marked north of the suburbs, a tantalizing promise of escape, waiting just beyond our reach. But between us and that fragile hope lay more uncertain terrain, neighborhoods filled with infected abandoned streets, and who knew what else. As the tracks began curving gently westward, the overgrown fields gradually gave way to clusters of homes, tightly packed and once filled with life. Now the houses stood silent, dark windows staring blankly back at us. The signs of hurried abandonment were clear. Front doors left ajar, cars parked at odd angles, personal belongings scattered across lawns, evidence of panic and desperation. Yet something else permeated these streets, an unsettling quietness even more oppressive than open fields. Here the buildings seemed to press closer, shadows deeper, hiding unknown dangers. I slowed our pace instinctively, motioning to Vivian to move carefully, keeping alert for movement or sound. We entered the suburb cautiously, stepping off the railway and moving slowly down a narrow residential street lined with single-story homes. Trash and debris littered sidewalks, blown by wind or scattered by fleeing residents. The deeper we moved into this area, the clearer signs of the outbreak became. Here and there lay bodies, silent and unmoving, partially hidden by abandoned vehicles or debris. Occasionally we heard distant muffled groans or the scraping footsteps of infected, trapped in houses or alleys, lost in aimless wandering. Each sound heightened our tension, our steps becoming quieter, more deliberate. At one intersection, I paused, peering carefully around the corner before signaling Vivian to move forward. We moved between parked cars, our weapons raised slightly, constantly scanning for threats. It was as we crossed a small side street that movement suddenly erupted from the shadows to our right. A lone infected stumbled toward us, its movements clumsy and uneven. I reacted swiftly, aiming and firing a single precise shot. The infected fell silently, collapsing onto wet pavement, yet the sound of gunfire echoed briefly, reverberating off buildings. I tensed, alert for further movement. A moment later, from down the street, several more infected emerged, drawn toward us by noise and instinctive hunger. Without hesitation, Vivian stepped forward calmly, her shotgun firing with controlled precision. One shot per infected, each falling without a sound. Together we moved quickly through the open intersection, retreating into a nearby driveway, scanning rapidly for shelter. We chose a two-story house, its front door already open, quietly slipping inside and securing the entrance behind us. Inside, the air felt stale and heavy with abandonment. Personal items were scattered around, as though the family had simply vanished. I secured the door further by sliding heavy furniture against it, creating a temporary barrier. We stood silently for a moment, catching our breath, listening intently for further movement outside. Only silence greeted us, broken occasionally by distant, indistinct sounds echoing faintly. The interior of the house was dark, rooms shrouded in shadow. We quickly cleared each room, checking closets and behind furniture, ensuring no surprises waited within. Upstairs we found a small bedroom, windows facing the street, offering visibility of the surrounding area. Carefully, I eased back the curtains slightly, peering out into the subdued daylight. A handful of infected wandered aimlessly down the street, but no large groups. If we waited briefly, the immediate threat might pass, allowing safer passage onward. Vivian settled quietly by the window, shotgun resting comfortably across her lap, eyes steadily watching outside. I stood behind her silently, scanning the distant rooftops, streets, and yards. Each minute dragged slowly, stretching endlessly as we waited for movement outside to diminish. Yet in those quiet moments of waiting, my thoughts drifted to the reality we now faced. How quickly everything had changed, how tenuous and uncertain our survival had become. The life I'd lived before, money, crime, a sense of control, seemed impossibly distant, meaningless compared to the basic, immediate struggle to survive another hour, another day. After nearly an hour of waiting, the street outside appeared quiet enough to risk moving again. Silently, we rose, gathering supplies and checking weapons once more. We slipped cautiously out the rear of the house, moving carefully between yards, avoiding open spaces. We chose narrow paths, weaving between fences and garages, gradually progressing northward through the suburbs. Occasionally, infected wandered nearby, but we avoided confrontation whenever possible, using stealth and patience rather than precious ammunition. As evening approached once more, we found ourselves near the outskirts of the suburb, the last clusters of houses thinning into open fields and wooded areas again. From this vantage point, looking northward, we spotted what appeared to be several military trucks abandoned along a nearby access road, doors open, equipment scattered. Curious but cautious, we approached carefully, weapons raised. The vehicles were deserted, supplies mostly looted, but some useful items remained. Spare ammunition, first aid kits, military rations still sealed in packaging. We quickly collected these essentials, adding them to our packs. Yet as we moved away from the trucks, heading toward the tree line, a sudden movement nearby caught my eye. A soldier, uniform torn, face pale, eyes unfocused, stumbling toward us from behind one truck. It took only a moment to realize he was infected. Vivian raised her weapon instinctively, yet hesitated briefly, recognizing perhaps something of the man he'd once been. I gently nudged her aside, firing calmly and accurately, ending his silent suffering instantly. She said nothing, simply nodded quietly, understanding the necessity but clearly unsettled by the encounter. We continued forward quietly, moving into the dense woods beyond, using trees and shadows as cover. Nightfall deepened rapidly beneath thick foliage, the darkness around us near absolute. We moved slowly, constantly alert for threats hidden in the shadows. Yet the deeper we moved into the wooded area, the quieter everything became. The city and suburbs were behind us now, replaced by wilderness, silence, and isolation. Still, I trusted no silence completely. Danger now seemed everywhere, unseen yet constant. After nearly 2 hours of careful navigation through dense trees and underbrush, we reached a small clearing overlooking a narrow river. According to the map, crossing this waterway was essential, placing us directly onto the path toward the airstrip. We paused briefly, catching our breath, drinking water sparingly from our dwindling supply. Vivian sat silently beside me, eyes closed briefly, exhaustion etched clearly on her face. Yet despite fatigue, her grip on the shotgun never loosened, her senses never fully relaxing. We crossed the shallow river, water splashing softly around our boots. The opposite shore rose steeply into rocky terrain, trees thinning slightly, visibility improving beneath dim moonlight filtering through sparse branches. Ahead, a dirt path wound steadily uphill, likely leading toward farmland above. The airstrip lay beyond, waiting patiently in darkness for our arrival. We moved carefully uphill, each step slow and deliberate, muscles aching from prolonged tension and exertion. The night felt strangely calm now, danger momentarily distant, yet instinct warned against complacency. Every shadow felt threatening, every distant sound a potential danger. But we pressed steadily forward, drawn toward the fragile hope awaiting us. The possibility of escape, survival, a chance at something beyond mere endurance. At the crest of the hill, the trees gave way suddenly, revealing wide open fields beneath faint moonlight. Farm buildings stood silently below, barns and sheds clustered together, equipment abandoned mid-task. Beyond these farms stretched another dense wooded area, obscuring the final stretch toward our destination. We paused briefly, observing the empty fields cautiously. No immediate movement appeared, yet caution was necessary. Quietly, I gestured Vivian forward, descending slowly toward farmland below, moving carefully between empty structures, eyes alert. We were nearing our goal, the promise of escape tantalizingly close. Yet each careful step reminded me of how tenuous our survival remained. Nothing felt guaranteed, every moment uncertain. We had escaped the city, suburbs, and immediate threats, yet danger remained constant, unseen yet ever present. Beneath the calm exterior we both projected, quiet tension lingered, each thought aware of how swiftly everything could change again. Together we moved quietly onward, drawn by thin hope, guided by cautious logic and instinctive survival. Ahead lay uncertainty, risk, and perhaps escape. Behind lay loss, abandonment, and lives we'd left behind without choice. Our journey continued steadily, every step forward another careful balancing act along the narrow path between hope and despair. The dawn sky emerged slowly over the farmland, a dull, faded yellow bleeding into shades of smoky grey as we moved cautiously through the dew-soaked fields. Our movements had slowed considerably, fatigue weighing heavily on our limbs. Yet adrenaline continued to push us forward, driven by a stubborn determination that refused to let us rest. The night had felt endless, but as the landscape gradually grew clearer, revealing outlines of distant structures and tangled woods, our destination finally came into view. Beyond the farmland, toward the northern edge of the river, we spotted signs of activity. A small encampment, barely visible at first, blending subtly into the dense jungle foliage lining the riverside. Approaching quietly, we saw a simple arrangement: canvas tents stretched taut between wooden poles, makeshift barriers constructed from sandbags and logs, a few battered crates stacked near the riverbank. At the water's edge, tied loosely to a weathered dock, bobbed the unmistakable shape of a small floatplane. Its fuselage was slightly rusted, its paint chipped and faded, but even at this distance, it appeared sturdy enough to fly. 3 figures moved slowly around the plane, their movements weary yet focused, clearly absorbed in repairs and preparations. Vivian and I exchanged glances, recognizing the potential importance of this opportunity. Yet caution remained vital. Carefully we approached the encampment, weapons lowered slightly but ready, making sure not to startle those inside. One of the men, a soldier in a tattered uniform, his rifle slung loosely over one shoulder, noticed us first, raising his weapon reflexively before recognizing our human forms clearly. The others quickly followed suit, their expressions tense but not hostile. Vivian stepped slightly forward, signaling calmness and intention to speak. I followed closely, watching their reactions carefully. The soldiers looked exhausted, eyes hollow, uniforms stained and torn, faces worn by fatigue and constant stress. Beside them stood another man, likely a mechanic, judging by grease-stained overalls and tools scattered at his feet. He stared silently at us, wrench held loosely, his face cautious but curious. Quickly, I explained our situation. Escaping from Belo Horizonte, seeking passage northward. My voice remained calm, steady, choosing words carefully. I mentioned our limited resources, gold jewelry we'd scavenged along the way, weapons with extra ammunition, and valuable intel on routes we'd safely traveled. The soldiers listened closely, exchanging quiet, cautious glances. Finally, after brief deliberation, one soldier, likely their leader, stepped forward slowly, agreeing to our offer. The agreement was simple. We'd share our supplies and information. In exchange, we'd accompany them northward aboard the floatplane. With mutual trust established, we moved quickly toward the aircraft. The mechanic pulled a cracked rubber hose out of the barrel. Fuel sloshed over our boots, while he crimped the line with pliers, cursing the split seam. We took turns pumping a hand siphon, muscles shaking. 10 long minutes before the last gallon gurgled into the wing tanks. Vivian covered us the whole time, eyes never leaving the tree line. Each moment stretched endlessly, tension growing subtly as the reality of our situation remained clear. Danger persisted constantly, unseen but ever present, surrounding us silently within the dense foliage. As the fueling process neared completion, an uneasy stillness settled over the encampment. Even the jungle seemed suddenly silent, an unnatural calmness that made every sound sharper, every movement more noticeable. Vivian glanced briefly at me, eyes narrowing slightly, sensing something amiss. I listened intently, alert for any hint of approaching danger. The soldiers, too, grew tense, movements cautious, weapons held tightly. Wiping sweat and fuel from his forehead, the mechanic muttered, "If this starter hangs again, God help us all," then slapped the cowling shut and waved us aboard. Just as he slammed shut the fuel hatch, stepping back with obvious relief, a sudden noise erupted violently from the jungle perimeter. A loud crash, branches snapping sharply, heavy footsteps approaching rapidly. Within seconds, a chaotic scene unfolded before us. Several infected burst suddenly through the makeshift perimeter barrier, movements erratic but determined, their eyes vacant yet fixed on the nearest targets. Instantly, gunfire erupted sharply, echoing loudly through the encampment. Soldiers moved quickly, firing methodically at the advancing infected. Vivian fired from near the cockpit, each shot precise and controlled. I raised my weapon, aiming carefully, trying desperately to maintain order amid sudden chaos. Yet more infected continued emerging from the jungle, numbers increasing steadily, their approach relentless and overwhelming. One soldier, caught slightly off guard, fell quickly beneath a sudden onslaught, the infected swarming him rapidly, his screams muffled beneath their desperate frenzy. I watched helplessly, firing rapidly, but unable to save him. The other soldier shouted angrily, desperate to regroup, firing steadily despite evident panic. Vivian continued firing calmly from near the aircraft, keeping infected at bay, her accuracy unwavering even amid chaos. I moved backward steadily, covering our retreat toward the floatplane. Suddenly, sharp pain erupted along my leg, burning, intense, causing me to stumble slightly, nearly falling. Glancing down, I saw blood seeping steadily from a deep gash caused by jagged debris scattered during the chaotic fighting. Not bitten, thankfully, but injured seriously enough to weaken my movement considerably. Yet adrenaline and stubborn survival instinct forced me onward, gritting my teeth against pain, moving steadily toward the aircraft. Vivian reached toward me urgently, pulling me aboard quickly, firing once more at approaching infected. The surviving soldier scrambled aboard behind me, shouting instructions frantically to the mechanic, who quickly started the floatplane's engine, propellers spinning loudly, water splashing violently, as we began accelerating downriver. Infected reached desperately toward the aircraft, clawing futilely at its hull, their faces twisted in silent desperation. Vivian continued firing steadily from near the open cockpit door, each shot carefully preserving our fragile escape. Slowly, steadily, the floatplane gained momentum, moving rapidly downriver, water splashing heavily around us, engine noise drowning out all other sounds. Yet even as we lifted slightly above the water's surface, infected continued emerging steadily from jungle foliage, dozens crowding desperately toward the riverside, hands outstretched futilely as we ascended into smoky, uncertain skies. Below, the encampment faded quickly from view, consumed rapidly by dense jungle foliage, leaving behind another grim reminder of the relentless chaos overtaking our world. As we climbed higher into the murky dawn sky, breathing heavily yet grateful to be alive, silence settled over the aircraft cabin, each occupant reflecting quietly on recent events. The surviving soldier stared silently through the cockpit windshield, expression unreadable, mourning his lost companion quietly. Vivian glanced briefly toward me, eyes narrowing with concern upon seeing blood seeping steadily through makeshift bandages wrapped hastily around my injured leg. I shrugged slightly, acknowledging silently the seriousness yet unwilling to dwell on it presently. We had survived, barely escaping immediate danger, yet uncertainty remained constant. Beneath us stretched endless jungle canopy, dense foliage obscuring terrain below, hiding countless dangers and unknown horrors. Ahead lay uncertainty, fragile hope balanced delicately against the harsh realities confronting our world. Our escape had succeeded, for now, but each moment remained precarious, every decision crucial. The floatplane hummed steadily onward through smoky skies, carrying us cautiously toward distant possibilities, uncertain futures, and tenuous survival amid relentless chaos. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.